Phyllis Wheatley, the poet who changed America forever. In 1773, a young enslaved woman stood before 18 of Boston's most powerful white men. They questioned her intensely, trying to prove she couldn't possibly have written the brilliant poetry that bore her name. This woman was Phyllis Wheatley. Not only did she prove her authorship that day, but she would go on to become the first published black poet in America, shattering misconceptions about black intellectual capability, helping lay the groundwork for the abolition movement. Kidnapped from West Africa at age 7, around 1761, she was brought to Boston on a slave ship called the Phyllis. Purchased by John and Susan Wheatley, they named her after the ship that brought her to America. Despite the trauma, Miss Wheatley showed remarkable intellect and aptitude. She learned to read and write English in just 16 months. She mastered Latin, studied classical literature by age 12, and started writing poetry at a young age. She was a natural genius, to say the least. Educated in classical literature, Greek and Roman mythology, English literature, Bible study, and geographics. She was influenced by Alexander Pope and John Milton, two classical Greek and Roman poets. Miss Wheatley began writing sophisticated poetry by age 13. She developed a unique style, blending classical references, Christian themes, personal experience, and commentary on slavery. Her first published poem was in 1767. The title, On Masher Huffy and Coffin. Miss Wheatley faced publication challenges. Many doubted a black person could write poetry. She was required to authenticate her ability, forced to face examination by 18 prominent white men. She had to prove her authorship. Her 1773 breakthrough was unheard of for any black person at that time. She published poems on various subjects. She was the first published black poet in America. Miss Wheatley was forced to publish books in London due to American resistance, but still received international recognition for her brilliance. Her work challenged fundamental assumptions about black intellectual capability. She challenged the justification of slavery and fought for race and human equality. She changed the woman's role in society. The poetry she wrote had the power to change minds, with poems like One Being Brought from Africa to America, to His Excellence George Washington, in a poem called On Liberty and Peace. Her impact on society proved black literary excellence. She inspired the abolition movement, influenced Revolutionary War discourse, and changed white perspective on slavery. Phyllis Wheatley gained freedom in 1773. She was granted freedom shortly after her book was published. This was significant. Many slaveholders feared educated enslaved people. Most wouldn't free their enslaved, even if they showed talent. The Wheatleys recognized her genius was incompatible with bondage. However, freedom in 1773 came with serious challenges for black people: limited employment opportunities, legal discrimination, social exclusion, and economic hardship. The death of Susan Wheatley in 1774 was a hard loss for Phyllis. Susan had been her main supporter and advocate. She taught her how to read and write and encouraged her poetry. Susan helped her make important social connections, and her death left Phyllis without her strongest ally. This loss deeply affected both her emotional and social standing. John Wheatley's death in 1778 further destabilized her position in society. She lost her last connection to the wealthy Wheatley family, which left her without any influential protector. She was forced to be fully independent in a hostile society. She married John Peters in 1778. Peters was a free black man who worked as a grocer. He had some education, and initially, everything seemed promising. However, the business struggled, and in the face of discrimination, he eventually was in prison for owing money on a business loan. Phyllis was left alone and struggling. Her financial hardship was overwhelming. Her writings were not enough to support herself. She was forced to work as a scullery maid, the lowest level servant. She lived in poor conditions and couldn't find a publisher for her new works. All the social connections that helped her before were nowhere to be found. The poverty affected her health. Despite all these challenges, she never stopped creating poetry and managed to work on a second volume of poems. She wrote about the American Revolution and continued to advocate for freedom. Miss Wheatley maintained her literary excellence, but most of these later works were lost or stolen. Phyllis Wheatley died in 1784 in extreme poverty. She was only 31 years old and died in a boarding house. That make me feel sad. She didn't deserve that. Her last child died hours after she did, and most of her later writings were never recovered. Miss Wheatley left behind an incomplete second volume of poetry. This period shows how even extraordinary talent couldn't fully protect a black woman from the harsh realities of 18th century America. Despite being internationally famous, despite her genius, despite her connections, the racial and gender barriers of her time ultimately contributed to her death. The tragedy of Wheatley's later years makes her achievements even more remarkable. She continued to write and create even as her world fell apart around her. Her story demonstrates both the incredible heights black excellence could reach and the crushing weight of the systems designed to suppress it. Her immediate impact inspired other black writers. She influenced the abolition movement and changed colonial attitudes. Her long-term influence continues to resonate. She pioneered black American literature, inspired generations of black poets. Miss Wheatley proved black intellectual equality and helped establish black literary traditions. Phyllis Wheatley, modern-day significance, continues to influence black writers. She is studied in universities worldwide. She is a symbol of black excellence and an inspiration for modern liberation movements. Phyllis Wheatley didn't just write poetry. She rewrote what was possible in an era when black people were considered property. She proved that black minds could soar beyond any chains placed upon them. Her words didn't just change literature, they changed minds, changed hearts, and helped change America itself. Every black writer who puts pens to paper today stands on the shoulder of this extraordinary, beautiful woman who dared to write her way to freedom and into history. Like and subscribe, family, to learn more about foundational black Americans who shaped the nation and culture and history. Hit that notification button, leave a comment, let me know what's on your mind. Share this video to help others understand the profound impact of black excellence on American society. Until next time, peace. Foundational Black American family. And last but not least, the foundational Black American family send love to our ancestor, sister, mother, queen, Phyllis Wheatley. We love you.